It's really great of you to spend your Friday night with us, and I hope that we make it worth your while. Given the events of the past weeks and maybe the past years, it really is a timely discussion to look at the state of the world, the state of the UN, and its ability, its effectiveness, its credibility in addressing modern threats. The most respected Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld of Sweden, said that the United Nations was not created in order to bring us to heaven, but in order to save us from hell. In the first quarter of the 21st century, it seems that the UN is failing even at that. The UN seems paralyzed, and the world appears to be descending into further chaos, crisis, and conflict. Clearly, the UN and the Security Council in particular have failed to achieve their intended purpose of peace, prosperity, and justice. The concurrence of current crises serves as a disturbing measurement of the distance between the Charter's vision and the reality of our world. But even if a third world war is averted, the UN is still failing time and again to prevent aggression, and despite the universal cry of never again, failing to prevent genocide again and again. In the last 25 years alone, we have had many aggressions, including the US-UK invasion of Iraq in 2003, the Russian invasions of Ukraine in 2014 and 2022, and recently the US attacks on Iran and Venezuela and Iran again. So many genocides in this quarter century alone, against the Darfuri people in Sudan, the Yazidi people in Iraq, and according to the ICJ, 2 more plausible genocides, the Rohingya people in Myanmar and the Palestinian people in Gaza. Balancing the power of principles with the principles of power, the Founding Fathers created the United Nations of 6 principal organs, each with distinct but complementary roles and functions, balancing the lowest common denominator amongst the member states, in particular the permanent member states, yet aspiring to meet the highest expectations of the people of the world, first and foremost to save us from another world war and another Holocaust. This system of checks and balances forms the basis of our international legal and political order, and it is only viable and desirable when each organ assumes its intended role and fulfills its assigned functions. In our book, Floriane and I brought together a distinguished group of authors from every region of the world, which in its 10 chapters provides a way for each to live up to its intended purposes, and in so doing, finding a way around the veto. My own chapter on the UN General Assembly and Uniting for Peace, Floriane's chapter on the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice. We also have chapters on regional arrangements and the 10 elected members, where 2 of our distinguished speakers, Ambassador Marschik and Ambassador ElBanai, will be giving us food for thought as well. My chapter elaborates the many untapped powers of the General Assembly acting under Uniting for Peace. And I will elaborate a little bit further on that. Floriane's chapter expands on the increasing resort to the International Court of Justice in contentious cases as well as in advisory opinions. Ambassador Marschik has a chapter exploring ideas for bringing automaticity to accountability for aggression and mass atrocity crimes. Ambassador ElBanai's chapter tells us how the 10 elected members can improve the leverage of their vote against the veto of the permanent members. Abusing the veto in the face of mass atrocity crimes violates a permanent member's obligations under customary international law, the Genocide Convention, as well as the common articles of the Geneva Conventions. A veto in these situations also prevents the Security Council from fulfilling its own responsibility to maintain international peace and security, and to fulfill its responsibility to protect civilians from genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Former Foreign Minister of Liechtenstein, Dr. Katrin Eggenberger, will tell us about her country's initiatives to ensure that permanent members have to explain themselves to the broader membership when they use, or I should say abuse, their veto. The veto is not a flaw in the design of the Council. It is an intentional and inherent part of the package, a gift to the permanent members to ensure that they are willing to join and stay as members of the UN. We cannot get rid of it without amending the charter, and we cannot amend the charter without the agreement of the 5 permanent members. So as our book maintains, we must find a way to do so without amending the UN Charter. We must rely on the existing tools at our disposal, the other principal organs, the courts, the regional organizations, and the membership itself, both the 10 elected members as well as the broader membership. So let us now take stock. Are we stuck when there are rogue states, especially when the permanent members are the rogue state? What we have seen in the 10th and emergency special sessions of the General Assembly dealing with Palestine and Ukraine gives me hope that the General Assembly, the big sleeping elephant, is willing to wake up and is willing to start using powers that it has exercised in the past. The power to create peacekeeping missions, the power to recommend sanctions, the power to recommend arms embargoes, the power to authorize referenda, as well as military assistance, not only to member states, but also to national liberation movements who under international law have the right to resist, provided that they do so in accordance with the laws of war. The fact that they have done these emergency special sessions and resumed them time and again, condemning the invasion, calling it the aggression in Ukraine, finding the legal opinion from the ICJ, the advisory opinion on the unlawfulness of the occupation and of the annexation and the settlements, as well as the plausible genocide, and calling for measures, including the binding measures imposed by the ICJ, that their readiness to take it to the next level, that they're ready to talk about sanctions, but they haven't yet imposed them. Now, the difference between the Security Council and the General Assembly is that the Security Council can bind, whereas the General Assembly can only recommend. But when it recommends, it gives legal basis, legal authority for those who are willing and able to act to do so legally and legitimately and with the support of the international community, in fact, to give effect to the will of the international community. So let us hope that the member states find the courage and the conviction to live up to the potential of this resolution, of the Uniting for Peace resolution, and that they have the courage that the ICJ and the ICC have shown in standing up to threats, intimidation, and sanctions in order to fulfill their mandate. So without further ado, we now have the great honor to hear from Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei, the former Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency and the 2005 Nobel Peace Prize laureate. He is uniquely placed today, having been the nuclear watchdog, as they call him, during the lead up to the war in Iraq. And his efforts and Hans Blick's efforts to stop that war failed, but they showed the courage that is required to speak truth to power, and he's doing it again, as the same false pretexts are being used for the war in Iran. Without further ado, Dr. ElBaradei.
Good evening, everyone. While I wish I could have been with you in person tonight, I'm grateful for this opportunity to share a few thoughts on our troubled and troubling world. It is quite disturbing that a consistent and deliberate demolition of the past World War II global architecture is happening in plain sight, today even. This architecture, though imperfect, was designed to provide the norms and multilateral framework to enable us to live together in peace and security, justice and equality. The United Nations and international law have been at the heart of this global architecture. But while the United Nations has been successful in social, culture, economic, and other areas, it fell quite short in peace and security, where it matters the most. This is largely due to the steady paralysis of the Security Council, the body entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. The ideological and political division and competition among its permanent members and the misuse of their veto power has led over time to the Council impotence, nearly to the point of irrelevance. Look at Ukraine, Gaza, Palestine, Iran, Sudan, and many other conflicts. While the global community was broadly optimistic after the Second World War and the end of the Cold War, that the world may see more cooperation than division among major powers, who would be working, we assumed, for the common good rather than for their narrow self-interest. These hopes quickly dashed and dissipated. Quite the opposite. Our world is confronted with existential threats of grave magnitude, whether the nuclear arms race, the climate crisis, or the uncertainty around the direction and impact of the currently exploding artificial intelligence. All this in an environment of chaos, polarization, double standards, and dehumanization. We know full well that there is no silver bullet, as they say, to reverse course. But we also recognize in our conscience that all of us have a collective and individual responsibility to at least stop the bleeding until we are able someday to amend the UN Charter to reflect the lesson learned and the geopolitical changes of the last 80 years. We must, in the interim, find creative ways to make the Security Council more effective without amending the Charter, at a minimum, to protect human life and maintain human dignity. In this connection, I want to thank Mona Ali Khalil and Floriane Lavaud for their initiative in gathering this excellent group of academics, diplomats, and other practitioners to produce concrete proposals for improving the workings of the Security Council without necessarily amending the Charter. They co-edited a timely and important book entitled Empowering the Security Council: Reforms that Address Modern Threats. As contributor and co-authors, they sought to show that what can be done to make the UN and Security Council act promptly and effectively on behalf of the UN membership, the entire UN membership, as provided for in the Charter, and not just held hostage by the 5 permanent members. It is therefore legitimate and absolutely needed to work inter alia for the restriction of the use of veto power, for better empowerment of the 10 non-permanent members, for better transparency and accountability, and certainly for better involvement of the other UN organs, especially the UN General Assembly and the International Court of Justice. The bigger the gap between the actual workings of the Council and the Council's mandate, the greater the need for other actors to step in to fulfill the Charter promise. This meeting today is a valuable and timely opportunity to remind ourselves and the world leaders, especially our friend the P5, that the erosion of respect for the fundamental principle and customary norm of international law is itself a threat to international peace and security. We must also impress upon them, in particular, that it is in their very interest to respect and uphold the multilateral order and the international rule of law. I wish you a very successful and productive meeting.
We now have the privilege and pleasure to hear from Ambassador Alexander Marschik. He is the ambassador of Austria to Germany and formerly the permanent representative of Austria to the United Nations in New York. Prior to that, he served as Director General of the Austrian Ministry for Foreign Affairs and ambassador to the EU's Political and Security Committee. Ambassador Marschik, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mona, and thanks to the Diplomatic Academy. Thanks, Mona, for putting it all together, the book, but of course also this event here. It's heartening to attend a panel on the United Nations in times like these, I have to say. When I told colleagues about it here at the embassy in Berlin, they said, what, the UN? Why are you wasting your time on that? There is no UN out there. Look at the world. Well, as anyone who knows me, and there are some who do, I totally disagree with that. But it's certainly true that the UN, multilateralism as a whole, and also international law are in a very severe crisis. It raises fundamental questions, but I'll come back to that in a moment. In front of this audience, it's no need to expound further. The UN, the concept, and the vast family of organizations that we have today reflect the ideas of the victor states of the Second World War 80 years ago, especially the ideas and concepts of the US, enshrining a broadly liberal Pax Americana, promoting notions of peace, human rights, justice, in a system safeguarding the role of the P5 and supported by all those who signed up, which is all of us. We are often quick to criticize the UN, and there are good reasons for that sometimes. But it's also clear that the UN has done an outstanding job in raising international standards over decades on all aspects of our life, and also in helping states and especially people struggling to survive. On peace and security, the role of the Security Council, the picture is of course mixed, and we just heard that from Mohamed ElBaradei and from Mona. But from its conception, the Security Council was designed to act effectively whenever the P5 wanted the Council to act. That's unfair, but we can't really complain because we all signed up to that system. And the system did work more or less over the past decades. We often hear that the Security Council is paralyzed and does nothing. If you look at the facts, that's not really true. In the year 2022, the year of Russia's aggression against Ukraine and a lot of tension between the West and Russia and also China to some extent, in that year, the Security Council held 419 meetings, adopted 54 resolutions, 7 presidential statements, and 67 press statements. That's not nothing. In 1959, if you compare it, during the height of the Cold War, the Security Council all year held 5 meetings and adopted 1 single resolution. So clearly the UN and the Security Council also in the area of peace and security does act and can act. But it's true that today the Security Council basically decides on issues of international administration, while it's unable to act on specifically those crises that affect most of all our feeling of peace, Russia's aggression against Ukraine, the situation in Gaza, now the situation in Iran and the Gulf. It's the way the system is conceived, but it's extremely frustrating for everyone. And that's the reason why right from the outset, there have been many efforts to reform the Security Council. Tareq is going to talk about this much more in detail, but in essence, the efforts to reform the Council have centered around enlarging the membership to make it more representative of the world today, and on finding ways to abolish or limit the use of the veto. I had the great honor and privilege, and I have to say also pleasure of co-chairing these reform discussions in the IGN together with Tareq for 2 years. And also, in a way, the highlight of that exercise, negotiating the outcome of the Summit of the Future part that dealt with Security Council reform. That part of the Pact of the Future shouldn't be completely forgotten. World leaders approved 3 actions on Security Council reform, which, according to the Secretary General Guterres, were the first effective decisions on Security Council reform since 1963, when the Council expanded from 11 to 15 members. And indeed, if you look at that text, if you look at the pact closely, the 193 member states formally agreed on initial elements of a reform council. such as a bigger role of Africa and also recognizing a role for groups of states, the need to discuss limitations of the veto. They agreed on a process to move forward with urgency based on a consolidated model to be presented by the co-chairs as a blueprint for a General Assembly resolution. And they also agreed on interim measures until a reform enters into force, such as adhering to Article 27.3, to not use the veto in certain situations, such as genocide. So the summit in 2024 really moved the process forward, setting the stage for a possible final phase of Security Council reform. But unfortunately, as we know, with UN 80 and certain developments, this has now stepped a little bit into the background. The key element now is the consolidated model that Tareq will produce. This model should bridge the remaining strong divide among states, whether there should be new permanent members, whether there should be members with veto or not. That's very difficult, but not impossible. Some argue the current situation is not the best moment to proceed. On the other hand, when is there a good moment? When the Council worked well in the 1990s, people said, don't touch it. It's working really well. Let's not get excited. Let's keep it working. Don't change anything now. So when is a good moment? My advice is full speed ahead. Time is now. Let's get a move on. It's clear, however, that even if we do move forward, international agreements right now are difficult. Reform may take time until it really enters into force. And it's therefore vital, if the UN is to survive this time, to look for additional possibilities outside the Security Council. And we have quite a lot to work with, mainly, as Mona already said, the General Assembly. There we could develop the veto initiative. We can go from simply having meetings to also actually having adopting resolutions. We can resort more frequently to uniting for peace efforts. As was pointed out, there's a whole wide range of instruments. Mediators can be appointed, peace operations can be sent, political missions can also be adopted. And the GA even once recommended that states impose unilateral sanctions as a crisis management tool in the 1960s against Portugal. So the main problem in all this is the political readiness to implement measures against a powerful state. My proposal in the chapter that Mona referred to is the General Assembly should create a system of automatic consequences for grave violations of the Charter. It sounds anachronistic to the whole system, but it's not. We have that actually in the UN system. If you violate Article 19, the Charter obligation to pay your dues over several years, you automatically lose the right to vote in the General Assembly. If you violate Article 2.4, the prohibition to use force, nothing happens. My suggestion is a General Assembly resolution that establishes an abstract mechanism, not triggered by any specific individual act, but an abstract mechanism that simply says that whenever the General Assembly decides by a qualified majority that a grave violation of the UN Charter has occurred, a set of consequences are automatically triggered. Like an automatic speeding ticket, if a radar gun gets you, no matter how powerful you are, no matter how important you are, you will get that ticket. You will have to pay. And you also know that in advance. So before you commit the act, you know you will automatically be confronted with consequences. The consequences can be an increasing set of measures, such as the exclusion from certain UN functions and conferences, the freezing of funds, exclusion from trade or financial systems. It can go as far as exclusion from IATA travel routes, the rights of your ships to dock at certain ports, to access satellites or the internet. Many of these consequences would be automatically implemented by the UN Secretariat or specialized agencies and other organizations who are actually legally bound to implement General Assembly resolutions. Now, we know, as Mona said, states, they are not legally bound, but they can use a General Assembly resolution as a foundation for voluntary measures. And we saw that, for example, also in the aftermath of the Russian aggression. So in conclusion, you can see that there are many ideas out there how we can empower the UN while staying strictly within the system of the Charter. And I have to say, I very much hope that we can stay strictly within the system of the Charter. It may seem strange that at this point is even emphasized, but we have to be aware that we are currently at the point in time where we may be witnessing a fairly rapid transition out of our UN Charter system altogether. Strangely enough, it's the US itself that seems to lead the charge in destroying its own Pax Americana system of 80 years ago, possibly laying out the framework for a new system. And as a very smart colleague of ours said, a Pax Americana 2.0, where international law and its instruments and the classical international institutions and organizations have no role or a very limited role. But where it's also very unclear who will be part of that system, what the parameters, mechanisms, instruments, the rights and obligations are in this system and how it will function. It's a very decisive time for our leaders. Stick to the existing system and reform it meaningfully, or ditch it and move towards something different, something new. New does not have to necessarily be bad, but before we embark on a new system, let's be absolutely sure we know what we're getting ourselves into. If not, I can tell you, I'm going to quietly escape into the mountains somewhere with UN friends to be far away from everything. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador Marschik. I now have the great pleasure to introduce a friend and my co-editor, Floriane Lavaud. She is a senior partner at Withers in New York. With 20 years of experience, she advises and represents sovereign states before the International Court of Justice and a range of pro bono clients before the International Criminal Court. Floriane, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mona. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking the Vienna School of International Studies and the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna for hosting and convening this timely conversation. I also thank my dear friend Mona for organizing and moderating this panel and for your leadership on proposing practical charter-based reforms. Just last week, the United States and Israel began launching military strikes against Iran. Since then, the violence has continued to escalate, with retaliatory missile and drone attacks spreading across the Middle East. This is not a theoretical discussion about institutional design. It is a live test of whether the UN Charter still functions as a meaningful framework for addressing crisis. My remarks, not surprisingly, will draw on the book that I co-edited with Mona, Empowering the UN Security Council Reforms to Address Modern Threats, which shows how the United Nations can be strengthened without amending the Charter. Let me start with a candid observation. The UN system is not struggling because its principles are outdated, and Ambassador Marschik and Mona as well alluded to that before. It is struggling because practice has drifted from the Charter's core bargain, which is collective security grounded in law. The risk is not only paralysis, as we have seen yet again in the past few days. As the Secretary General has repeatedly warned, and Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei also made that point, it is the progressive erosion of respect for the legal framework designed to govern international peace and security that is a threat. Against this backdrop, the question is not whether the UN should adapt, but how it can do so within the four corners of the Charter. And I would like to suggest three pathways for doing so. The most immediate, and today the most realistic, and again, Mona and Ambassador Marschik referred to it, pathways, to this particular pathways, lies indeed with the General Assembly. As Mona explained in her chapter of our book, we must tap the full potential of the General Assembly. This is not about weakening the Council. It is about ensuring that the organization as a whole is capable of responding when its primary organ is paralyzed. One long-standing mechanism is, of course, the Uniting for Peace resolution, which allows the General Assembly to convene in emergency session and make recommendations when the Security Council is unable to act. Ukraine, now in its 4th year, and the situation in Palestine demonstrate this very clearly. In both cases, the General Assembly has continued to meet in emergency session to reaffirm charter principles because the Security Council was unable to act. A second and more recent mechanism is, of course, the Liechtenstein initiative, and we'll obviously hear from that from Minister Eggenberger in just a minute. That initiative ensures that whenever veto is cast, the General Assembly convenes promptly to debate the situation. And I'm particularly pleased to mention that initiative, of course, in the presence of Minister Eggenberger, and I truly thank her also for her leadership as a former both Foreign and Justice Minister of Liechtenstein, and we're obviously honored also by the presence of the ambassador here this evening. In the context of this widening escalation across the Middle East, those tools that I just mentioned matter. Why? Because they help preserve legal coherence and accountability. Even where the Security Council is unable to act, the wider membership can still anchor the international response in charter language on de-escalation, protection of civilians, and diplomacy. The second pathway is to strengthen the role of the International Court of Justice within the UN system. Not as a cure-all, of course, but as an essential component of the collective security framework. As I argue in my chapter of the book, strengthening the court's role does not mean substituting judicial processes for political decision-making. It means using the court more deliberately to clarify legal obligations and restore the balance between law and politics. While the General Assembly has made regular use of the court's advisory jurisdiction, the Security Council has only requested an advisory opinion once. The Council has similarly refrained from applying Article 36(3) of the Charter, which expressly encourages referring legal disputes to the court. Now, several mechanisms nevertheless exist, and I'll mention 3 of them. First, states should be encouraged to submit to the compulsory jurisdiction of the court under Article 36(2) of its statute. Indeed, broader acceptance enhances the court's authority and supports the peaceful settlement of disputes. And just last week, we saw that Iceland declared that it submitted to the compulsory jurisdiction of the court, becoming the 75th state to do so. Second, the Security Council should make greater use of its power under Article 94(2) of the Charter to support compliance with the court's judgments. This provision is again rarely invoked, but it does exist in the Charter. Finally, the court can also be more systematically integrated in the Council's deliberation, particularly when legal questions underpin that political deadlock. One way this can occur is, of course, again, through the court's advisory jurisdiction. Together, those steps would strengthen the court's role and its contribution to international peace and security. And it would also reinforce the principle that no state is above the law. The third pathway concerns clarifying the legal boundaries of the veto power. The veto is a legal power conferred by a legal instrument. It should therefore be interpreted in light of the Charter's purposes and principles and of general international law. Under Article 96 of the Charter, the General Assembly may request an advisory opinion from the ICJ on, and I quote, any legal question, end of quote. An opinion on the limits of the veto could therefore clarify how veto use should be understood, for example, in situations involving aggression, atrocities, including also the application of Article 27.3 of the Charter, which, as you may know, requires abstention under Chapter 6 when a council member is a party to a dispute. This would not eliminate the veto, but it would strengthen the legal framework within which it is exercised. It would also complement efforts such as the Liechtenstein veto initiative, but also the France-Mexico initiative, which calls for voluntary veto restraint in situations of mass atrocities. Of course, other avenues may be also considered, including interpretive General Assembly resolutions, but also the imposition of sanctions, as Ambassador Marschik just mentioned. Excellencies, colleagues, modern threats include the speed within which crises escalate across military, political, and nuclear domains. But the urgency we face today is not sudden. It has accumulated over time, culminating in the widening escalation we are witnessing today across the Middle East. Empowering the United Nations does not require reinventing the Charter. It requires today disciplined use of the mechanisms already embedded in it. A General Assembly prepared to act when the Council cannot, an International Court of Justice used as a tool of legal clarity, and sustained efforts to ensure that veto power is exercised in conformity with the Charter. The question is not whether the United Nations can be empowered. It can. The question is whether member states will choose to use the Charter's own mechanisms consistently so before the next crisis once again outruns the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Floriane. We now have the pleasure to hear from Ambassador and co-author Tareq AlBanai. He is the permanent representative of Kuwait to the United Nations in New York. Prior to that, he served as the political coordinator for the Security Council of his country's two-year tenure on the Council, and as advisor on disarmament affairs in the Office of the President of the General Assembly. Ambassador AlBanai, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mona, for putting this together. Floriane and Mona, thank you for making me a part of this wonderful project. Co-host, co-chair, what a wonderful time to see you. You are sorely missed in New York, and I'm very happy to see you, even if it's on a screen. And I ask you to kindly reserve a room in the Alps for me when, when the time comes. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to join you today for this important discussion on empowering the United Nations Security Council to address modern threats. We meet at a time when the need for more effective and credible and representative Security Council is no longer a matter of abstract debate. It has become an urgent institutional question. Too many member states have watched the Council struggle to respond to crises because of deadlock among its permanent members. Too often, the use or threat of the veto has prevented timely action, weakened confidence in the Council, and reinforced the perception that the body is neither sufficiently fair nor sufficiently effective. That frustration is real, palpable, and it's widely shared. My chapter in this book was about respecting the UN Charter starts from that reality, but it does not stop at criticism. Its central argument is that while Charter amendment remains extraordinarily difficult, there is still substantial room for meaningful reform within the existing charter framework. In particular, the chapter looks closely at Article 23, 24, and 25 and asks a simple question. How can the charter itself guide us toward a more responsible and effective council? Let me briefly highlight three ideas. First, on Article 23 is not only about composition, it is about legitimacy. We often read Article 23 as a provision that divides the council into 5 permanent members and 10 elected members. But Article 23 also sets out criteria for electing non-permanent members, including their contribution to the maintenance of international peace and security and to the purposes of the organization. That is important. It reminds us that membership in the council is not merely a matter of status, it is tied to performance, to responsibility, and to the respect to the principles of the Charter. And if those standards matter for elected members, they should matter at least as much for permanent members, whose authority is greater and whose responsibilities are enduring. Permanent membership should not be understood obligation. This is also why the role of the E10 is so important. The elected members are often treated as secondary actors in council dynamics, but this is a mistake. When the E10 act with unity and discipline and strategic coordination, they can help rebalance deliberations, broaden the council's political imagination, and reinforce its representative character. I would like to say that for all the advancement in working methods over the last at least 20 years, most, if not all, have been initiated by elected members of the council. Second, Article 24 reminds us of the council's core mandate, the maintenance of international peace and security. The problem, of course, is not that the mandate is unclear. The problem is that the council is too often unable to discharge it effectively. National rivalries, geopolitical competition, and entrenched positions can turn the council from an organ of collective security into a theater of political stalemate. This is why practical improvements in working methods matter. My chapter argues for steps that can strengthen the council's preventive and deliberative capacity without waiting for charter amendment. These include more systematic horizon scanning, more regular and candid briefings by the Secretary General, and fuller use of the Secretariat's analytical capacities. These are not procedural niceties. They are tools that can help the Council act earlier, with better information, and with greater seriousness. The chapter also points to the value of drawing more consistently on the expertise of member states with direct regional knowledge. In situations of crisis, proximity matters, historical experience matters, political and cultural fluency matter. A council that is better connected to those realities is more likely to make sound decisions. Third, Article 25 goes to the heart of the Council's authority. Article 25 obliges member states to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council. It is one of the foundations of the collective security system created by the Charter. Unlike General Assembly resolutions, Security Council decisions are legally binding, but legal authority is not self-executing. It depends on credibility, consistency, and political will. And here we face a serious challenge. The problem is not simply non-compliance by member states. It's also the unevenness with which the system responds to non-compliance. Selective enforcement, double standards, and political shielding have damaged confidence in the Council's legitimacy. This is not a theoretical issue. It has had devastating humanitarian consequences. The recent handling of the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian questions, has sharpened concerns across the membership that the law is not always applied evenly and that accountability is not always pursued consistently. If Article 25 is to mean what it says, then the Council must be prepared to uphold its decisions impartially, not selectively. A rules-based order cannot endure if the rules are seen as contingent on power. Excellencies, these questions took a renewed importance at the Summit of the Future, which I'm so glad my co-chair alluded to, and to the experience that we had negotiating the part on Security Council reform. It marked a significant political moment for Security Council reform. In the pact, world leaders formally recognized the urgent need to reform the Council and agreed on initial elements of reform, a process for moving negotiations forward, and interim measures to improve the Council's functioning while broader reform is pursued. And I will quote what my co-chair said. Secretary General Antonio Guterres described the outcome as the strongest language on security reform in a generation and the most concrete steps towards Council enlargement since 1963. That was significant, not only because of the language itself, but because of what it reflected politically. For the first time in decades, the membership collectively acknowledged both the urgency of reform and the need for a more concrete pathway forward. The pact recognized the need to increase representation for developing countries, acknowledged the historical injustice against Africa, and affirmed that the Council's working methods should be more inclusive, transparent, democratic, efficient, effective, and accountable. It also agreed to discuss limitations on veto use and to include a review clause to help ensure the long-term viability of a reformed Council. Just as important was the procedural commitment. Member states agreed to continue negotiations without delay with a view to developing a consolidated model of a reformed Council that could serve as the basis for eventual text-based negotiations. That matters because reform has too often stalled at the level of general principle. A consolidated model offers a bridge between recurring positions and actual negotiation. The pact also endorsed a number of interim measures, and these deserve attention because they speak directly to the theme of today's discussion: how to make the Council work better now, even as structural reform remains under negotiation. Among these measures was renewed attention to Article 27.3, under which a party to a dispute shall abstain from voting. And my distinguished panelists have already alluded to this, and I would like to kindly thank the distinguished minister from Liechtenstein for their initiatives in this regard. The pact also emphasized the need for timely and decisive action in cases involving genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. It pointed to the General Assembly's role, including through the veto initiative and Uniting for Peace framework, when the Council is blocked. And it underscored the need for immediate improvements in working methods, including on questions such as penholdership and stronger cooperation with other UN organs, including the Peacebuilding Commission. All of this reinforces a broader point. Security Council reform is often presented as a single binary question. Either the Charter is amended or nothing meaningful can happen. I do not believe that is correct. Structural reform remains necessary. Enlargement, better representation, and fairer working methods are indispensable if the Council is to retain legitimacy in the 21st century. But there is also a great deal that can and should be done in the meantime, through stricter adherence to the Charter, through better institutional practice, and through greater political responsibility by council members themselves. That, in essence, is the message of respecting the UN Charter. Charter is not the obstacle to reform. Properly understood, it's part of the solution. If we take Article 23 seriously, we elevate responsibility over entitlement. If we take Article 24 seriously, we refocus the Council on its core mandate. And if we take Article 25 seriously, we insist that the Council's decisions be upheld consistently and credibly. The challenge before us is therefore not only legal or institutional, it is political. Reform will require flexibility. It will require movement beyond long rehearsed positions. And it will require a shared understanding that the credibility of the Security Council is not a regional issue or a procedural issue or a question for diplomats alone. It is a central test of whether multilateralism can still deliver on its founding promise. The modern threats we face, armed conflict, mass atrocity, geopolitical fragmentation, transnational insecurity, demand a council that is more representative, more accountable, more democratic, and more capable of acting. The Pact for the Future showed that the membership can move the conversation forward. The task now is to build on that momentum with seriousness, strategic patience, and determination. Thank you.
We now have the great honor to hear from Dr. Katrin Eggenberger, the former Foreign Minister and Minister of Justice of Liechtenstein. She is also an affiliate of this very institution, the Vienna School of International Studies, and as well the Liechtenstein Institute on Self-Determination at Princeton University. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Distinguished guests, in addition to the two ambassadors online, we're also having two excellencies in the room here with us today, Ambassador Simon Biedermann and Stefan Barriga. A very warm welcome and thank you for coming. Many thanks also go to the Vienna School of International Studies and to our dear moderator, Mona Ali Khalil, for this opportunity to address such an important topic, empowering the United Nations to address modern threats. It is a true honor to be on this panel alongside my dear friends and distinguished colleagues, and to share insights from Liechtenstein's work at the United Nations. For over 7 decades, the United Nations has been the cornerstone of global peace, security, and human rights. Yet today, the institution faces unprecedented challenges. Rising geopolitical tensions, we just heard it, increasing use of the veto in the Security Council, and in some cases, declining trust in its ability to act decisively. The question we face is not only whether the UN can act effectively, but how small and medium-sized states can contribute to ensuring it fulfills its founding mandate. Ladies and gentlemen, a central issue for the UN's effectiveness has always been the Security Council veto. As early as 1949, the General Assembly adopted Resolution 267, urging the permanent members, the so-called P5, to exercise the veto only when a question is of vital importance to the UN as a whole and to provide a clear explanation for doing so. Yet, amending the UN Charter to limit the veto is extremely difficult. Article 108 requires 2/3 of the UN members plus ratification by all 5 permanent members, meaning no reform to eliminate or restrict the veto is possible without their consent. This is why political and voluntary initiatives have become essential. As such, Liechtenstein has played a leading role in 2 major initiatives to encourage responsible use of the veto. First, the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group, ACT, founded in 2013 by a cross-regional coalition of 27 small and mid-sized states. The so-called ACT group drafted a code of conduct calling on our Security Council members, permanent and elected ones, not to vote against resolutions aimed at preventing or ending genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. The Code of Conduct contains of 5 commitments. First, support timely and decisive action to prevent mass atrocities. Second, not to vote against credible resolutions addressing such crimes. Third, encourage the Secretary General to bring early warnings to the Council. Fourth, to take such assessments fully into account. And 5, to invite all United Nations member states to express commitment to this code. And second, the veto initiative, which I had the privilege to pre- and co-lead in my capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Justice and Culture of Liechtenstein, which resulted in the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 76 out of 262 in 2022. This resolution mandates that whenever the P5 member casts a veto, the General Assembly convenes within 10 days to discuss it. The vetoing P5 member provides a public justification, and the Security Council submits a report on the use of the veto. And at this moment, I would like to sincerely thank Stefan Barriga, Excellency Barriga, here in the room, for his important work at the United Nations, for the United Nations from out of New York, because you've been working for a long time with our ambassador, Christian Wennerweser, on site. And as a result, also thanks to Christians, and specifically also Stefan Barriga's long-standing work over many years, these initiatives are practical demonstrations that even small states can advance accountability, transparency, and timely action at the UN, even when structural obstacles exist. And ladies and gentlemen, Stefan Barriga hasn't just worked weeks and months on this, but years. And beyond the veto, to mention, Liechtenstein actively supports the International Criminal Court. And this is also a topic that is very dear to my heart. And also the multilateral cooperation for peace, justice, and human rights. And our focus, the focus of the Principality of Liechtenstein, remains on preventing mass atrocities, strengthening multilateral responses to conflict, and third, ensuring that the United Nations remains a platform for collective responsibility, not only for the powerful, but also for all the member states. Because we remember, everyone has a say at the United Nations, if small or big country. It doesn't matter, everyone has one vote. And these efforts also illustrate that leadership is not defined by size, but by commitment, consistency, and diplomacy. In addition to our work on accountability and justice, Liechtenstein has taken a leadership role also in the FAST initiative, which I would really like to also mention quickly. FAST stands for Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking, together with Australia and other partners in collaboration with the United Nations University. And this initiative harnesses financial intelligence and international cooperation to combat modern slavery and human trafficking, demonstrating how multilateral action can translate into concrete protection for vulnerable populations. What is very important to point out, and I come to an end of my short speech, that the United Nations challenges are real, ladies and gentlemen, but its decline is not inevitable. Liechtenstein's initiatives show that small states can lead by example, demonstrating that political will, strategic partnerships, and innovative mechanisms can strengthen the United Nations' role in global governance. And for Europe and the European Union, a strong, effective United Nations is vital, ladies and gentlemen. It provides the foundation for peace, security, and the rule of law, without which European stability and the credibility of multilateral norms are at risk. As we face modern threats, from mass atrocities to global conflicts, we must continue to innovate, collaborate, and insist on accountability. the United Nations remains indispensable, and together we can ensure it fulfills its mission for generations to come. Thank you, and I look forward to discussing how these initiatives and the United Nations more broadly intersect with Europe and the European Union, and how we can continue to strengthen multilateral action in the years ahead. Thank you again.
If I can ask that we join the online speakers for the first round of questions. I'll take the prerogative of moderator to be the one to ask the first question, and then I will open it up to our beautiful audience. And but I'll plead with my panelists to keep their answers to 2 minutes so that we can maximize the number of questions from the audience. I would like to take the advantage of the focus on Liechtenstein for a moment. In my opening remarks, I referred to the principles of power and the power of principles. If the US and Russia and China represents the principles of power, then Liechtenstein, in my opinion, represents the power of principles, not only with regard to Liechtenstein's initiatives vis-a-vis the veto, but also Christian Beneveser, with the support of his team in New York, has shepherded multiple initiatives, including the Rome Statute, the crime of aggression in the Rome Statute, as well as the two initiatives on the veto, including the whole code of conduct of the ACT group. Accountability, I always forget what the C stands for, and T for transparency. So really, Liechtenstein, probably the smallest member state, has had the biggest impact on the rule of law and maintenance of rule of law in the United Nations, not as an aspiration, but as really a pragmatic a pathway to peace, security, and justice. And coupled that with the co-chairmanship of our two guests, Ambassador ElBaradei and Ambassador Marschik, who, as the Guterres acknowledged, and Guterres has not been the most effective Secretary General, despite his tremendous potential. He has also not lived up to his potential, has recognized there was no assumption that we would have a consensus text on the Security Council reform. So what these two men achieved is truly remarkable. Not only a consensus, but a consensus with concrete, actionable, forward-looking, meaningful provisions, and not like 1 or 2 provisions, but like 9 provisions. So if you take a moment and go and look at that 2 or 3 parts of a very mammoth document, it's really quite impressive what they were able to achieve. Now let's hope that member states live up to their pledges and actually implement what they promised they would. So we're living in dire times. I think we all recognize that. But there's plenty to keep us hopeful. That the fact that the law exists and that we must uphold the law is necessary in order so that we can have something to measure the violations of the law. So I turn in reverse order now to Dr. Eggenberger and ask you, although the EU is only a regional organization, it has had an impact on the international stage, far outsizing its regional role. How has the decline of the UN in recent years impacted the EU?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me be very direct, and I'm no longer an minister in power. I'm a former foreign minister, so I can also speak hopefully more openly and more directly. And that's why I would like to start with answering that question in one sentence. A weakened United Nations benefits those who prefer power over rules. And that is definitely not in Europe's interest. If the United Nations weakens, Europe feels it immediately. And yeah, Europe thrives in a rules-based order, as we all know, and the United Nations provides predictability, legal frameworks, and collective legitimacy. If vetoes block action, and we've seen that so many times, on aggression or mass atrocities, that does not simply weaken the UN, it normalizes impunity. And for the European Union, let me just mention what that means with 3 risks. Strategic exposure, that's one risk. Instability in our neighborhood without effective multilateral crisis management. normative erosion, international humanitarian law and human rights becoming negotiable rather than binding. And the third risk I see is geopolitical marginalization, decisions shifting from multilateral forums to exclusive power blocs. And we are seeing that today, right? So Europe does not have the luxury of disengagement. If the UN weakens, Europe's influence contracts. And that is why initiatives promoting transparency, accountability, and restraint, including those led by smaller states, and we heard a couple today, are not symbolic gestures. They are safeguards for Europe's own stability and global role. And just to sum up, yeah, the choice is clear in my opinion. Either we invest in multilateralism or we adapt to a world increasingly shaped by unilateral power, ladies and gentlemen. And I prefer multilateralism, definitely. So thank you.
You're not alone. Ambassador ElBaradei, the US-Israel attacks on Iran have triggered a major regional conflagration. Iran is retaliating against Israel and US interests across the Gulf and beyond. Your own country has been hit. Did the weakness of the UN and the UN Security Council pave the way for this new and wider war in the Middle East?
Thank you very much. First, I would like to one thing very important. As I speak to you now, sirens are blowing in the skies of Kuwait, and my people are taking shelter. My family is disrupted. Our lives are set upside down. And it is truly a shame. And this is something that the Council needs to pronounce itself on immediately. And I don't speak only for Kuwait, it's all the Gulf Cooperation Council. We've all been targeted illegally, I have to add. It's not a matter of retaliatory thing. Two wrongs do not make a right. We are being targeted for absolutely no reason, when the GCC was at the forefront of conflict prevention and resolution and mediating between the parties to make sure that exactly what's happening now is not happening. It is unfortunate. Civilian infrastructure has been targeted, vital economic structures, international airports, commerce, trade routes, maritime routes. It is disruptive not only to us, but it's disruptive to the whole world. And in an ideal world, a Security Council needs to be at the helm of this. It needs to act immediately and to make decisions under Chapter 7 to stop this madness and to be able to contain its repercussions on the innocent. We talk about international humanitarian law and international law and the Charter of the United Nations. The General Assembly empowered the Security Council to act on its behalf on matters threatening the international peace and security. And I can't see any more obvious threat than what's happening now. So yes, a weak Security Council is a threat in and of itself to the international peace and security.
Very well put. I turn to you, Floriane. The P5, especially the United States and Russia, not that you represent the United States any more than I represent my country, have increased their use of the veto in the last 2 decades. How has this affected the credibility of the Security Council in particular and the UN in general?
Thank you, Mona. Just before addressing this question, I just want to just pick up on what Tareq mentioned. I just wanted to say that my thoughts and prayer with the people of Kuwait, of course, and the people across the region during this very difficult time. Every time Mona and I organize an event, I must say, you know, there's always some conflict, just either the day of or just days before. So maybe this will mark that we stop. But anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge what you said, because, of course, when we started planning this meeting months ago, we had no idea, of course, that this discussion would be as timely as it is today. So quickly, to go back to your question, which I think is a very important one, because the use of the veto does not only have an impact procedurally, of course, it has an impact that is reputational, that is systematic. At a general level, the frequent or controversial use of the veto, whether it's by the United States, Russia, or other permanent members, inevitably affects the credibility not only of the Security Council, but also of the wider UN membership. When the veto is exercised in situations of acute human suffering or threats to international peace and security, it reinforces the perception that outcomes are driven more by power than by law. It reinforces the notion, unfortunately, that some states, as I said earlier, are above the law, and that is simply not acceptable. Over time, of course, it has real consequences. It weakens the confidence in the Security Council itself as a true organ whose core mandate is really to maintain international peace and security. And it also encourages member states to look elsewhere and to engage in unilateral actions, as we have seen recently. So I think this is all a reminder of why the mechanisms that we have all mentioned during the course of this discussion this evening really matter, because they reinforce the importance of the framework of collective security grounded in law and, of course, consistent with the Charter. Thank you.
Thank you. Axel, the war with Iran, the ongoing war in Ukraine, and the ongoing horrors in Sudan and Palestine. Does the decline of multilateralism increase threats to international peace and security?
That's an easy one. The answer is yes. I can be very brief, obviously. I think that the decline in multilateralism, if we call it that, has a whole multitude of reasons. One is just your list of issues. I think we humans have a certain limited capacity of dealing with too many things at the same time. It just becomes very, very complex and complicated, and these issues are not easy to solve, otherwise they would be. But I think there are three things that really make things particularly difficult for us at the moment. That's one, I think there's a certain distance between our political leaders and the UN system. I think that any good multilateral system requires states' readiness to compromise, and we might have lost the art of compromise. And we need some joint areas where we agree on very, very basic principles, or at least a joint reality that we can agree on. If we lose that, it becomes difficult. So I think what we have, the UN is over 80 years old, and I think that makes it a bit distant from our political leaders. If you have political leaders involved in the founding of an organization, they feel a personal responsibility to make that organization a success. But once you have leaders that come into the business and an organization is already there, it is seen as something extraneous. It's no longer your creation. It is something that is almost like a burden where you have to attend, where you have to go. And so you see the UN, and I think that for at least a couple of leaders, they see the UN more as a platform for a speech, a nice backdrop for a photograph, or possibly also a bilateral meeting that could be interesting. But there is a shrinking number of politicians who really see the UN as their personal responsibility to achieve success. And as that, of course, reduces the recourse that states take to make use of the many good offices and many good mechanisms and instruments that the UN can offer. The second thing about the art of compromise, multilateral diplomacy, where you have 193 states in the room, of course, you're going to have to, in negotiations, be prepared to let go of something that you are determined to get. Your position, you will not be able to get it into a solution for 100%. But that somehow is lost. We have states going into negotiations, and Tareq and I, we saw that very, very strongly in the discussions on the Security Council reform. It's a 100% of my position and nothing else I will accept kind of mentality. And that makes negotiations in a multilateral setting very difficult. And finally, this question of reality. I think today with artificial intelligence, with fake news, you can really construct your own reality. And I felt striking after the Russian aggression against Ukraine in 2022. I remember being struck at the UN that we lived in three realities. We had the Western reality, which was focused on this act of aggression. We had the Russian reality, which was very much focused on a dangerous imperialistic West that was trying to impose its views on the rest of the world. And other states who were telling us, hey, look, we have so many other problems involved. Our world is one of poverty and hunger, and let's focus on these issues. And sometimes it makes it difficult if you have no longer common premises to really work on. If that falls out, and if you live in your own echo chambers, and with AI nowadays, it's very easy to construct a reality for yourself, which is completely consistent, which is completely easy to maneuver in, and where you have no interest and readiness to engage with others. That makes multilateralism very difficult. So yes, we have a lot of problems. Yes, it's very complex, but also we have to overcome some of very basic things that impede us in being successful in multilateralism. And Mona, if I may add one thing, I should have said that very much at the beginning of my first intervention already, but it counts as this one as well. I'm speaking here on my personal capacity, and my comments shouldn't be attributed to the Austrian Foreign Ministry, but I think that's clear. I think it's clear in this setting that this is a personal remarks that I'm delivering. Thank you.
Thank you, Axel. And I assume that also applies to Ambassador ElBaradei. The rest of us only have personal capacity, so. We now get to hear from all of you, and we welcome your questions. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'll take
7.
No, he was already. Okay, so I'll take 3 at a time, and I'll ask our panelists to give 1-minute answers so we can take another round of 3 and hopefully a third round of 3. At 7:30, you're all, of course, free to go, but if you'd like to stay, we will continue as long as there's anybody who has a question, and the same goes for the panelists. As of 7:30, everybody's free to leave.
First of all, thank you very much for the interesting panel and your contributions. My name is Leontine Kroon. I am a student here at the DA of the MAIS 2 program. And my question is regarding the modern threat of cyber warfare. I'm wondering if the institutional reforms that you have discussed so far could apply to these emerging technological threats, especially because developments in this area move much faster than traditional diplomacy does. And I know that there are developments such as the Convention Against Cybercrime in 2024, but this primarily targets non-state actors as well, and it's still working towards ratification. So my main question would be how the UN can be empowered to respond to this, and yes, how urgent do you consider that progress in this area is needed?
Thank you. Speaker here.
Right. Thank you very much for your very insightful presentations. My name is Elias Ritter, and I'm also a student here at the Diplomatic Academy. We've heard a lot about reforming the Security Council without amending the Charter, which, if I understood correctly, means limiting or questioning the power of the P5, such as the veto, but not questioning their privileged position. Now, if we look at the P5, they reflect the military and colonial realities after the Second World War. There is no voice representing Africa or South America or the Global South, actually, for that matter, which I personally consider to be very anachronistic in the modern world. I certainly do understand that reform is extremely difficult, but I wanted to know whether you think that a large amendment, also rethinking whether the P5 system is really feasible today, will be necessary in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm now going to give you the floor because you've been so helpful.
Thank you. My question is actually about the UN Security Council Resolution 2308, which has established the Board of Peace. In this way, I'm looking at it, it seems as if the UN has, or the Security Council specifically, has established a competitor for itself, and it's kind of been mentioned today that perhaps there's a framework for a different system that may be forming. And the question that I have is, does the UN kind of, the General Assembly, for example, would they consider that a negative or a positive development? Perhaps some competition would drive the reform to accelerate on the UN side, knowing that there's a competitor emerging. Just kind of wanted to see what you had to say about that.
Kuwait is gonna do. Thank you very much. Can we take a fourth question?
Thank you for the talk. My question would be, how serious can the UN ever be taken without having their own independent army that can actually intervene when international law is breached? Because so far the UN is mostly dependent on the member states, and obviously when one of the biggest member states breaches international law, the UN as a whole loses a lot of power. So how realistic is it that an independent army will be needed in the future for the UN to be really taken serious? Because words matter a lot, but once words are not enough anymore, there's always hard power that matters. And I mean, these times show it perfectly. Thank you.
And rather than take the liberty of dividing up the questions, I'm going to give each speaker 1 minute to respond to whatever they would like from what they have heard from our distinguished audience. So I'm going to go with Floriane first.
Sure, yeah. First question on the modern threats to cyber warfare. I thought that was a very good question. You correctly pointed out the work on the convention that is ongoing. I think that doesn't prevent, involvement of the UN organs, including some of the mechanisms that I mentioned, including resorting potentially to the International Court of Justice and seeking potentially an advisory opinion, or having an interpretive resolution, for example, of the General Assembly. Those could be mechanisms that could take place, I think, in parallel potentially, if there are questions of interpretation that arise.
Thank you. Did you want to touch upon the other?
Yeah.
If I can allow myself one 10-second answer. The Board of Peace, one of you asked about the Board of Peace, was the one endorsed by the Council is very different than the one launched in Davos by President Trump. There's night and day. The one that was endorsed by the Council is limited to Gaza. It has a limited time period through the end of next year. It has reference to universal principles, the legal principles. It talks about self-determination. It talks about no annexation, no occupation. It talks about coexistence, peace and security, two-state solution. The one launched in Davos is an attempt to replace the UN. It doesn't even, there's not a single reference to Gaza. There's not a single reference to the Middle East even. It purports to create a parallel United Nations, as you rightly hinted, but it's not the one endorsed by the Council. The Council needs to stand up and say so. If I can ask Axel to respond to anything of the 4 questions that we've heard.
Sure. I think the question was it Leonie on cyber. I can just say that yes. I mean the UN deals with everything that the member states wanted to deal with. So if member states want the UN to deal with cyber warfare, cyber terrorism, organized crime, whatever you want, it can do so. And it will depend on the member states then to implement any sort of agreement, treaty, or whatever member states come up with. On Elias, on the privileged position of the P5, that's what we have at the moment. Will be very difficult to change because don't forget the P5 will have to ratify any Security Council reform that has a charter amendment to it. So it's going to be tricky for sure. Is it impossible? No, we saw it already happen once in 1963. So it happened once before. Possible, but difficult, yes. And as regards the details, also regarding the question of the Global South, etc., look at the Pact of the Future. It's very clear that the reform efforts underway at the moment are very much focused towards strengthening the continents that are so far have been left out. So that's very much foreseen. Board of Peace, yes, Mona is absolutely right. For me, again, personally, the Board of Peace was the way to stop or to achieve a ceasefire at that point in time. That was what it took. It was what was proposed. It was the way to stop the bloodshed in Gaza. And that's the restricted notion that we have there. And that's how I would understand it. And I think that found support by the UN. And I think that most people would very much support that for this purpose. UN's own army, I would think it would be a brilliant affair, but frankly, I think it's going to be very difficult to imagine that actually happening, that member states, especially powerful member states, agreeing to that. But would it be good? It would be great. It would be great if the UN had its own security forces, and it would be great if the UN also had its own financial sources, such as, for example, the European Union has. That makes the European Union a very strong organization. It has its own budget, it has its own resources. The UN, of course, always depends on budget from member states, and that, as we just see right now, makes it so very much weak in that position.
Thank you, Axel. Katrin.
Thank you very much. The cybercrime question, very important, very urgent, and we need to empower the UN definitely in that regard, because that's the answer of probably today's war we are having in the Middle East. Cybercrime attacks will be the next stage of that for sure. Coming back to the P5 system very quickly, I wanted to mention, maybe to make sure that we got the veto initiative also right in that regard, because Liechtenstein's veto initiative really achieved that every time a veto is cast, the General Assembly now meets automatically. And the vetoing member must publicly explain its decision before the entire UN membership. So that changes only the dynamics. At the end of the day, it shifts the discussion from closed door to open diplomatic scrutiny and to open doors. And that's what, it was never like to really reduce the P5 or take power from them. No, it was more to have an open door conversation about their reasons why they vetoed it. And before that wasn't the case. And last but not least, question about the military. Liechtenstein has no military. So maybe that's devil's advocate now, but do we need a military? Do we really need to always have wars, right? I mean, we still exist, we're a neutral country, we have no military, and it works. So thank you.
There you go. Ambassador AlBanai, you have a minute.
A minute, okay, quickly. Unfortunately, we do need militaries. We're living proof of that because we're being attacked and we need to defend ourselves. So that's the unfortunate part. Having a standing army for the UN, I don't think there's a problem with volunteering forces for the UN. Many countries have taken it upon themselves to be part and parcel of all the peacekeeping missions going forward. The problem with that is you still need authorization by the Security Council for that army to mobilize. So we're still, held back by the political. Board of Peace, I completely agree with Axel. Board of Peace was a necessary outcome for the ceasefire to happen. Could the resolution 2803 have been better? Yes, of course it could have been better, and it could have spoken about many other things. However, it is important that we achieve that ceasefire, and it's important also that we have the mechanism to deal with Gaza in particular, the humanitarian situation, the opening of the borders, the reconstruction, the post-conflict environment, and also that reiterates the two-state solution, which is part and parcel of what United Nations is all about. On representation, we took a snapshot of 1945, and my country was not a member of the United Nations in 1945, and we were just a member in 1963 when we expanded the Security Council. Today, we're in 193. A new snapshot of today needs to be taken, and that's what the Council needs to represent, the whole world and not 1945.
I recall there was a young lady over here, and then, and the ambassador of Liechtenstein over here.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring discussion. My name is Ramona. I'm also a student at the Diplomatic Academy. And what sparked my question was the talk about the veto. So the ICC lacks jurisdiction over the crime of aggression against Ukraine because Russia is not a state party to the Rome Statute, and also a Security Council referral under Chapter 7 would eventually fail because of the Russian veto power. So now the Council of Europe, and together with other European countries, established a special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. And in your opinion, such a regional initiative, does it risk fragmenting international criminal law, or can it even be legitimate? Or do we need to push for a reform of the veto power or even the Rome Statute as such? Thank you.
Our last question of the evening. Apologies to all those who had questions.
Yes, good evening. My name is Stefan Barriga. First of all, congratulations on the book. Congratulations on the panel. I haven't read the book yet, Mona. You haven't sent me a copy yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. I'll have a question on your table of contents. Minister Eggenberger, thank you for mentioning me so friendly a few times. It made me realize that I'm getting old, because you mentioned I worked many years in New York, and that is now 10 years ago. The past 10 years I've been in Brussels. And so just now I've been reflecting. These are two multilateral places. They couldn't be any more different. Of course, the EU is integrated in a way that is way different from the UN, and there are lots of other reasons for that. But one thing that really struck me over the last years in Brussels was how crucial the role is of the European Commission in following up rigorously on the commitments and on the rules, and really being there and independent in following up on that. At the UN level, of course, we don't have a commission, we have the Secretariat. What about thinking of ways of empowering the Secretariat, or maybe thinking even further, turning it into something maybe completely different, so that it would be able to hold the other organs to account to some extent? And I noticed there is no chapter on the Secretariat in the book, if I'm not wrong. So that's my question. Shouldn't there be a chapter on the Secretariat? Thank you.
There should be a whole book on the Secretariat, and a chapter on civil society. Your role is very important as well. Reversing the order, and 1 minute to cap up. Ambassador AlBanai, you go first this time.
I will answer, and then I have to run. I don't think any regional arrangement is a threat to the overall approach. I think it's actually commendable to work with the tools that are accessible to you and that can be effective, and whatever helps at the end of the day for the promotion of justice is in everybody's favor. So I think this is the way forward. And thank you very much. I apologize, but I have to leave the panel. I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Best of luck to your family, and we pray for peace everywhere. Have a good night. Good weekend. I now turn to Ambassador Marschik, if you'd like to have a few last words, riffing off of our last two questions.
Yes, well, on the ICC and generally on the question of regional courts dealing with individual cases, I think theoretically it would be ideal if we had one clean system that worked, included every state and included everyone, and was responsible and had the jurisdiction over every potential conflict. That's an ideal scenario, an ideal world. That we just don't have that world, unfortunately. And in a way, we have to work with what we have. And so I agree completely with Tareq. These systems are not in contradiction to each other. They generally uphold each other and support each other, and therefore I think we should be grateful if we have an additional means and an additional international institution that will uphold the laws of accountability and thereby strengthen the whole concept and the whole international approach towards international law, humanitarian law, human rights law, and all that. So it's good. It's better than not having such a special court. On Stefan, yes, oh my goodness, it would be wonderful to have the Secretariat at the UN benefit from additional resources, additional strengths, additional rights, the possibility to step on the toes of other organs. Again, I think wishful thinking is one thing. Actually managing to do that is another. One thing that I always thought that, I mean, if you, just as you saw in Brussels, I'm sure, there is a vast knowledge and an incredible human resource people in the Secretariat. It's a lot of people, but there are fantastic people in there, and there are incredible resources there. And sometimes we get the feeling that they are working very much for themselves, that there's a lot of there's also within the Commission and the EU, you don't want to cooperate with member states. I would hope very much that we find ways to cooperate together more, that we sometimes open up a little bit. I understand completely that it's necessary for the civil servants of organizations to be completely independent. They should not come under pressure. They should not come under force or be in any way used by member states in ways to further those goals. Absolutely clear that they need to be independent. But it would be great if we could have much stronger interaction between the Commission and the member states, and also with the Secretariat of the UN and member states, in order to ensure that we pool resources. At the end of the day, we mostly want the same thing. We want a functioning and optimally functioning UN, and the expertise in the Secretariat is fantastic, and therefore it would benefit us member states to make a better use of that. Thanks.
That was an Arab minute. It was very long. Katrin.
I'll definitely do it shorter.
But very useful, of course.
I'll definitely be shorter. No more bureaucracy. Reforms are needed, yes. Maybe talk to the Liechtenstein crew here. Maybe they have some ideas how to take it up, because I'm no longer active. But at the end of the day, I love the question of you, Stefan, because I really think that Secretariat chapter should have been in that book, and maybe they do another one. I'm not the one who wrote the book, and now with the elections coming up 2027, because Guterres is going to be replaced, his term is coming to an end, maybe that's a new idea for a second book, ladies. But I'll leave it to them to answer. Floriane, please take over.
I was going to say that, maybe use less than a minute, actually. Maybe it's a great idea for a new book. Yes, exactly, and we'll pick it up on that suggestion. Thank you very much, Stefan.
Indeed. I mean, I think the Secretariat, like every other organ, has untapped powers. The Secretary General has not used Article 929 to the extent that he can. The Secretariat has not put forward proposals, either for accountability, for justice, even peace plans. It doesn't need to be asked. It has that prerogative, and it has failed to deliver. Something to leave you with. The Western European and other states group, including the EU, Canada, US, New Zealand, Australia, and Japan, has 3/5 of the seats with less than 1/5 of the world's population of the permanent members, and still you get 2 more of the 10 elected seats. Already, that injustice can be fixed by the General Assembly itself with a simple resolution of the required majority, changing the distribution of the existing 10 seats. Something to think about. But thank you all for staying a few extra minutes. We really value your time, especially on a weekend night. And let's hope that the vow, just less than a year and a half ago, the Pact for the Future, member states at the head of state level came together and said, we believe in the UN, we believe in multilateralism, we believe in the rule of law. How is it irrelevant less than a year and a half later? Why is it that we're ready to throw it all away? Let's come back to the Pact for the Future. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.